Good evening. I'm Judy Woodruff on the NewsHour this Thursday. The lead story. President Obama goes to Mexico to talk about drugs and guns, among other things. The rest of the day's news, including good and bad economic developments. Another look at America's gun culture on the anniversary of the Virginia Tech massacre. Turning strings of beads into homes for families in Uganda. And what's behind the big increase in home foreclosures?
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by...
The world is changing, and how we use energy today cannot be how we use it tomorrow. There is no one solution. It's not simply more oil, more renewables, or being more efficient. It's all of it. Our way of life depends on developing all forms of energy and to use less of it. It's time to put our differences aside. Will you be part of the solution? Chevron, human energy.
Intel, supporting math and science education for tomorrow's innovators. And by Grant Thornton.
And the National Science Foundation, supporting education and research across all fields of science and engineering.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Our lead story today, President Obama arrived in Mexico for a visit with President Felipe Calderon. On their meeting agenda, the growing flow of drugs and weapons across the border and immigration. Both leaders touched on those subjects at a joint news conference held late this afternoon in Mexico City. Here's an excerpt of what President Obama said.
There's one particular area that requires our urgent and coordinated action, and that is the battle that's taking place with respect to the drug cartels that are fueling kidnappings and sowing chaos in our communities and robbing so many of a future, both here in Mexico and in the United States. I've said this before, I will repeat it. I have the greatest admiration and courage for President Calderon and his entire cabinet, his rank-and-file police officers and soldiers as they take on these cartels. I commend Mexico for the successes that have already been achieved. But I will not pretend that this is Mexico's responsibility alone. A demand for these drugs in the United States is what is helping to keep these cartels in business. This war is being waged with guns purchased not here, but in the United States. More than 90% of the guns recovered in Mexico come from the United States, many from gun shops that line our shared border. So we have responsibilities as well. We have to do our part. We have to crack down on drug use in our cities and towns. We have to stem the southbound flow of guns and cash. And we are absolutely committed to working in a partnership with Mexico to make sure that we are dealing with this scourge on both sides of the border. And that's why we're ramping up the number of law enforcement personnel on our border. That's why for the first time we are inspecting trains leaving our country, not just those entering it. That's why our Department of Homeland Security is making up to $59 million available to defend our common border from this threat to both of our countries. In addition, as President Calderon and I discussed, I am urging the Senate in the United States to ratify an inter-American treaty known as SIFTA to curb small arms trafficking that is a source of so many of the weapons used in this drug war.
We'll have more on U.S.-Mexico relations after the other news of the day. New economic data released today on housing showed no end in sight to the downturn. But in other areas, there were better economic signs. NewsHour correspondent Kwame Holman has our report.
From housing to jobs, real estate to banks, the numbers were a mixed bag. The Commerce Department reported construction of new homes and apartments plunged last month to the second lowest level on record. Housing starts in March slid by nearly 11%. Regionally, the largest declines were in the West at more than 26% and the South 17%. But construction activity rose about 16% in the Midwest and was up 6% in the Northeast. A separate report showed the number of Americans threatened with losing their homes grew 24% in the first quarter. Realty Track, a foreclosure listing firm, said some 800,000 homeowners received foreclosure-related notices from January through March. That's up from about 650,000 a year ago. The nation's shopping malls also took a hit as General Growth Properties, the second largest mall owner in the U.S., filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The move was expected and lets the company hold off creditors as it reorganizes. Along with the bad came an unexpected dose of good news on jobless claims. The Labor Department reported that the number of newly laid off Americans requesting unemployment benefits fell last week to 610,000, well below economists' expectations. Still, more than 6 million people claimed benefits for more than a week, the most on record. In the financial sector, another bright spot. J.P. Morgan Chase became the latest bank to report better than anticipated earnings in the first quarter at more than $2 billion. The mixed results led to a mixed-up day on Wall Street as markets went up, then down. But as the closing bell neared, the Dow Jones Industrial Average surged, finishing up 95 points to close at 8,125. The Nasdaq rose 43 points to close at 1,670.
CIA officials who used harsh interrogation techniques like waterboarding on terror suspects will not be prosecuted. Attorney General Eric Holder said the government won't pursue criminal charges since the employees were following the Justice Department's legal advice at the time. The announcement was made as the Obama administration released 4 long secret legal memos from the Bush Justice Department authorizing exceptional interrogation techniques against terror suspects. The U.S. Justice Department today confirmed that a wiretapping program violated legal restrictions to guard against abuse. And a spokesman said new safeguards have been adopted. The story was first reported in the New York Times. It said the National Security Agency improperly tapped the phone calls and emails of American citizens on a far larger scale than the law allowed. Senator Dianne Feinstein, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, announced plans to investigate the matter. President Obama today called for the quick creation of a high-speed rail system to alleviate congestion on U.S. highways. The system would cover 10 corridors, among them the Pacific Northwest, the Gulf Coast, and a route across the Midwest. At a news conference in Washington, Mr. Obama said building the rail lines would be faster and cheaper than building new highways, and it would help the environment.
All of you know this is not some fanciful pie-in-the-sky vision of the future. It is now. It is happening right now. It's been happening for decades. The problem is it's been happening elsewhere, not here. We'll move to cleaner energy and a cleaner environment. We'll reduce our need for foreign oil by millions of barrels a year and eliminate more than 6 billion pounds of carbon dioxide emissions annually.
The president allocated $8 billion from the economic stimulus plan to get plans underway for establishing the rail corridors. A NATO soldier has died in a bombing in Afghanistan. The blast went off Wednesday in the eastern part of the country. There was no word on the soldier's nationality or the specific location of the attack. Inspectors from the United Nations Nuclear Agency left North Korea today on orders from the communist regime. The monitors had already removed seals and shut down surveillance equipment at the main nuclear complex at Yongbyon. 4 American inspectors who were also ordered out are preparing to leave in the next few days. In Washington, meantime, a U.S. State Department spokesman warned that North Korea will feel the repercussions of its actions.
The North Koreans took a decision. They wanted these monitors out. As I said, it's a step backwards. We want to see the Korean Peninsula denuclearized. This clearly is not taking us in the right direction. The North has not listened to the will of the international community, and therefore it's going to have to face the consequences from its unwillingness to meet the international community's requirements.
A UN committee is considering expanding sanctions against North Korea after its recent missile test launch, which violated UN resolutions. The American ship captain held hostage by Somali pirates arrived safely on land today in Kenya. Richard Phillips docked aboard the USS Bainbridge in Mombasa. He is expected back in the U.S. tomorrow afternoon. Meanwhile, overnight, dozens of family members welcomed the other crew members of the Maersk, Alabama. They arrived at a military base in Maryland to happy cheers. And still to come on the NewsHour tonight, the meeting of the presidents, the gun debate, a good news story from Uganda, and more homes in foreclosure. Margaret Warner has the Mexico City summit story.
President Obama's visit comes against the backdrop of an increasingly deadly war against Mexico's drug cartels. President Calderon has committed his army and national police to the fight. More than 6,000 Mexicans died last year in battles between the authorities and the cartels and among warring drug gangs themselves. Today, the two presidents pledged to cooperate in the fight.
Today, Mexico and the United States, we are, we can, and we must be neighbors, friends, partners, and allies. We are connected through our past, through our historic and demographic ties. Our president brings us together because we share challenges and opportunities.
Before leaving for Mexico, Mr. Obama launched a new effort to help from the U.S. side. He said the U.S. would go after the Mexican drug lords' financial assets by designating the three major cartels as kingpins. He described the plan to CNN in Espanol last night.
The kingpin law allows us to go after the finances, the financial underpinnings of the cartels in a much more aggressive and much more effective way.
Today's summit follows visits to Mexico by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, Attorney General Eric Holder, and Homeland Security Secretary Janet Napolitano. Mexicans were pleasantly surprised when Secretary Clinton, during her visit last month, said the U.S. bears some responsibility for Mexico's thriving drug trafficking business and the firepower of the cartels.
Traffickers use guns purchased in the United States to fight each other and to challenge the Mexican military and police. Their enterprise is financed in part by our country's demand for drugs, which sends up to $25 billion a year in illicit drug profits back into the hands of the drug kingpins.
Also yesterday, the Obama administration appointed a new border czar to oversee security efforts along the 2,000-mile border. The U.S. is also sending more agents to police the border and instituting checks of southbound vehicles for cash and guns. Today's meeting also comes as the U.S.-led economic recession increasingly affects Mexico. Rising U.S. unemployment reduces money sent by Mexican immigrants back home, and U.S. consumer demand is dropping for exports from its southern neighbor.
And for more, we go to Allert Brown-Gort, Associate Director of the Institute for Latino Studies at the University of Notre Dame. He is the citizen of both Mexico and the United States. And Robert Pastor, Co-Director of North American Studies at American University. He served on the National Security Council staff in the Carter administration. And welcome, professors both. Bob Pastor, beginning with you. We heard President Obama and President Calderon pledge close cooperation in this drug war. How close are they really, these two administrations, in how they see the problem and how they want to tackle it?
I think they're much closer than they've ever been. I think they have ushered in a new era away from the finger pointing between Mexico and the United States, blaming each side for the other side of the problem, to recognizing you can't manage the problem, let alone solve it, unless you feel a certain shared responsibility. I think President Obama has now pledged to accelerate the funding under the Merit Initiative. He's pledged...
That was the initiative that actually President Bush proposed, which is more money for, what, Black Hawk helicopters, other kinds of technical assistance.
Exactly. In June of 2008, President Bush encouraged Congress to move very rapidly, but in fact, none of the $1.4 billion has actually been transferred as of yet. I think President Obama and Secretary Clinton have both talked about the importance of doing something about the guns coming from the U.S. to Mexico, something important about stopping the money laundering that's going in, and something important about doing the demand side of the problem through health and education in the United States, which we have been neglecting.
Professor Brown-Gort, how do you see it? Do you think that the two governments are closer in how they see the problem and how they're trying to address it?
Oh, I agree totally with Professor Pastor. I think they are closer, the two governments are closer than they have been in years. And it really is an idea of a mutual responsibility, of a responsibility that is on both sides. I think President Calderon began this in his first meeting with President Bush, but I think it really took the Obama administration to come in, particularly Secretary Clinton's visit to Mexico City last month, when we really started to see that the dialogue was one of accepting the responsibility lay on both sides of the border. In the end, though, I wonder whether they are totally close in what constitutes victory in the war on drugs.
And that is because?
Well, I think because the United States thinks that victory in the war of drugs would mean an end to having the problem of drugs. And I think that Mexico probably takes a view that as long as the United States is trying to criminalize the problem only, that it is an unwinnable war. And that therefore what they should do is they should try and raise the costs of doing business in Mexico and have the cartels go elsewhere.
How significant do you think there is this sort of difference in aims, Professor Pastor? For instance, Janet Napolitano said in the last couple of days that the aim was to take out the cartels, and the Mexicans do use different language. Is that significant?
I don't think so. I think they all realize that they have to dramatically dismantle the cartels and try to end organized crime, but I think they're sufficiently realistic, and President Obama in his press conference underscored that we're not going to finish with this problem. Drug trafficking, like immigration, like all of the issues that characterize our relations with our two closest neighbors, Mexico and Canada, are transnational. We need to manage them much better than we have in the past. We need to manage them as partners, or perhaps even in a trilateral framework, more effectively than we ever have before, but you're not going to solve the drug trafficking problem, or the drug problem for that matter.
Professor Brown-Gort, what would Mexico like to see the United States do more? For example, I noticed that President Calderon has really said he'd like to see the assault weapons ban reinstated here. President Obama campaigned on that, but said today essentially that for now he would concentrate on enforcing current gun laws. Is that a significant difference? Is there more in other areas that the U.S. could be doing from Mexico's point of view?
Oh, I think there is always in some ways more that could be done in one specific area or another. However, I think that the important thing here is really that there is a sense of shared mission, that there is a sense of partnership. I think Professor Pastor is correct that as we integrate our economies more and more, that we really need to start looking at these issues, not only drugs, but also, for example, immigration, as things that need to be solved across both countries, or even with Canada as well.
But taking on some of these issues, Professor Pastor, it implies a political cost here for President Obama.
Absolutely. The most important issues are also the most difficult domestically. See, these are not foreign policy issues anymore. They're both domestic and foreign policy. To comply with NAFTA, we have to let Mexican trucks in. Well, the Teamsters and trucking companies don't really want that. And the only way you can make that happen is the President has to encourage the Congress to understand this is part of an agreement, and we're asking Mexico to do things that are very hard for them. And similarly, we have to, at some level, address this issue with the National Riflemen's Association. If you're really going to stop much of the weapons from going into Mexico, we have to deal with some gun laws in the United States. If Americans were being killed by guns coming in from Mexico, you can be sure that we would be imposing on Mexico their need to change their laws. And so we need to think about these issues in a very different way than we ever have before. We have to realize we're part of a larger community right now.
And Professor Brown-Gort, is there more Mexico could be doing, for example, on the corruption side?
Well, I think on the corruption side, sure, certainly there is more that Mexico could be doing. Mexico could be doing a lot to change the infrastructure, the political infrastructure that it has in place. But the other thing that we need to think about is that the sheer amount of money and the weapons are something that are feeding the corruption, the endemic corruption in Mexico. In Mexico, there's the saying that is called plomo o plata. I'm going to either give you lead, a bullet, or I'm going to give you plata, silver, money. So the amount of money makes it very, very difficult to control corruption. And so in some ways, the most important part of the Mérida Initiative is not so much the things that we tend to concentrate on, which are the helicopters and the other gizmos that we can use for drugs, but rather the structural assistance, the technical assistance to strengthen the police in Mexico so that this struggle can be demilitarized and moved over as a police function.
So bottom line, very quickly from both of you, do you think at the end of 4 years, at the end of both of these presidents' first term, that we will see that something substantial was achieved, or is this a sort of symbolic, we're in a new era, a new relationship, but nothing much will change?
Well, that remains to be seen. I think there is a determination that both presidents have now enunciated to do something about this, but I think very soon they're going to have to realize they have to fit this into a broader context, because our economic and social relationship in many ways is much more important, or at least as important as this. And we haven't really addressed that yet.
And Professor Brown-Gort, do you think we'll look back on this as significant?
I would agree. I think it is fundamentally significant. I mean, I think there is a different way of dealing with the government in a way that is much more open and much more of a partnership. Mexico is really looking to change its bilateral relationship with the United States, which tends to take on a monomaniacal tone. It was drugs, immigration, drugs. Mexico has many other issues. The United States has many other issues, trade among them, energy, and we're going to have to deal with those issues. And as Professor Pastor was saying that we have to deal with the National Rifle Association, Mexico at some point or another is going to have to deal with its oil law, which prohibits the investment of foreign firms. Every country has their little idiosyncratic things but in their political system. But we have to understand that in a new world, we really need to give a little bit to be able to take a little bit.
All right, now I'm going to have to take us away now, but Professor Brown-Gort and Professor Pastor, thank you both.
Thank you.
We've heard about Mexico, but we know gun violence has long been an issue on this side of the border. It was highlighted today by the anniversary of the worst mass shooting in U.S. history in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hundreds of balloons sailed into a clear, sunny sky on the campus of Virginia Tech as thousands gathered to commemorate the victims of the shootings that took place here 2 years ago. 32 people were killed by a fellow student, Sung Wee Cho, who fired hundreds of rounds from 2 pistols he had bought despite questions about his mental state. Over the past month, there's been a rash of mass shootings in the United States, which have left 57 people dead, 7 of them law enforcement officers. 2 weeks ago in Binghamton, New York, a 41-year-old Vietnamese immigrant, Jiver Lee Wong, killed 14 people, including himself. He fired 98 shots in a little over a minute from the 9mm and .45 caliber pistols he carried. Prior to the shooting, Wong mailed a letter to a Binghamton television station that included his New York State permit to own the handguns he used in the murders. Most states do not require such authorization. On March 22nd, 4 police officers killed were in Oakland, California, gunned down by a man pulled over for a traffic violation. 1 week later, at a North Carolina retirement home, 8 were shot dead.
The gunman has been identified.
And across 2 Alabama counties in early March, Michael McClendon shot and killed 10 people before turning the gun on himself. All these recent shootings come in the midst of a national spurt in gun sales that began in November. This buying spree has led to an ammunition shortage for some of the most popular guns. And requests for background checks ahead of gun purchases have increased by 25%.
I saw the men with the weapons inside the school.
Next Monday, there will be a remembrance of the massacre at Columbine High School near Denver, where 2 students murdered 12 schoolmates 10 years ago with handguns and semi-automatic weapons. For 2 different views on the guns issue, we turn to Daniel Webster. He's co-director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research. And Robert Levy, he's chairman of the Cato Institute's Board of Directors. He joins us from Naples, Florida. Gentlemen, thank you both for being with us. And Mr. Levy, I'm going to start with you. There were 2 more people killed today in a shooting in California. We don't know about this incident, but we do know in most of these shootings we've been talking about, these guns were legal. They were legally purchased. Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Well, of course we should be concerned about it. I think that I'm called upon to defend gun rights on anniversaries of mass shootings like this, but conspicuously missing from the reporting is all of the crimes that would be deterred because the would-be assailants suspected that their would-be victims might be armed. Guns are used for self-defense. These mass killings get high profile, but bear in mind that they account for a small fraction of 1% of all the murders in the United States. As a matter of fact, mass killings are much more prevalent in Europe, in countries that have much stricter laws than the United States, countries like Germany and Finland and Switzerland. Most of these mass killings occur in areas where the guns are absolutely banned. So it is the case that eliminating guns by law does not prevent these killings from occurring. And if it were so easy, we would have seen different results in Washington, D.C., where they had an outright ban on all firearms for all people, in all places, at all times, for all purposes, since 1976. 33 years, and Washington, D.C. was the nation's murder capital.
Dan Webster, that being the case, what does this say about whether the laws that exist that are on the books today about guns should be looked at again, or should they?
Oh, we have a long way to go with our laws. I think that the fact that some people who commit some violent acts purchase them legally doesn't change the fact that really we have 2 kinds of problems. One is, in my opinion, we don't have strict enough standards for who should possess a gun, who can legally possess a gun. But maybe more importantly, we really don't have systems that hold gun sellers accountable to make sure that they are only transferring guns to truly law-abiding people who are mentally competent.
When you say we don't have strict enough standards for whom should own a gun, what's an example of that? What could be done?
Sure. Well, felons are prohibited from possessing firearms. However, many individuals might have a string of violent misdemeanors they've been convicted of and have a very violent past. And research has shown they're incredibly high risk to commit more and more crime. Many of those crimes were originally brought as felonies and pled down as misdemeanors.
Robert Levy, what about tightening the rules and making it harder for individuals who, as Dan Webster just said, have had a string of violent misdemeanors, didn't rise to the level of a felony, but there was still questionable, concerning behavior in their background?
The Supreme Court in June of last year confirmed that the Second Amendment secures an individual right to keep and bear arms. Now, the important part of that decision is that it switches the burden to government to prove that its regulations are justified. I am certainly in favor of regulations that keep guns away from crazy people, from violent felons, from underage persons. No one would contend that we have a Second Amendment protection for suspected terrorists to be carrying weapons of mass destruction. Clearly, some people have to be prevented from having guns. Some guns have to be prevented from being held by anyone, and some circumstances should be regulated. But the important point is that government has to show us that these regulations are, first of all, necessary, Second of all, they're going to work. And third of all, the same ends couldn't have been accomplished by means that didn't compromise our right to defend ourselves by possessing arms. And I don't believe government has met that burden.
Dan Webster, is the burden on the government? Is that the way it should be?
No, I think the burden is on the government to do things that are prudent in the interest of public safety. And that's what many of our gun laws are designed to do. They're designed to keep guns away from dangerous people. The fact that they don't work perfectly, and in the case of, there was the example of Washington, D.C. having a problem with murders, that's not because they ban handguns. It's because, generally speaking, in states and really all states around, our laws are too weak. The guns were not coming from Washington, D.C. They were coming from Northern Virginia and other places where the laws were too weak.
Let me read you something, Robert Levy, from a last week a New York Times editorial, which I'm sure you saw. It said, inside Washington's bubble, it's as if the shootings in Binghamton and elsewhere never took place. The NRA's ability to intimidate grown men and women in the House and Senate remains undiminished. They're calling for more regulations, more restrictions.
Well, that's because they haven't examined the data. The data shows that guns are used in the commission of violent acts about 500,000 times a year. Guns are used defensively about 4 times that number, about 2 million times a year. And quite often, they're merely brandished, not even fired. The deterrent purpose of guns, the possession of guns by people who want to defend themselves, is what we have to preserve, and what now the Supreme Court has told us the Constitution does in fact preserve. A mere declaration by the New York Times that more regulation is necessary flies in the face of regulations that exist all across this country in cities that have very high rates of violent crime.
In essence, Dan Webster, he's saying the restrictions are there. They're just not enforced.
Well, that's true. We should have better enforcement, but that doesn't mean we don't need better restrictions. Just to comment on some of the numbers being thrown around about defensive gun use by civilians. That research has really been discredited. I think it's not very believable or credible. To think that criminals who are planning their acts and would be far less likely than someone who isn't necessarily expecting to be attacked to use a firearm in the incident, it just doesn't really make sense or line up with anything we know about violent crime.
Let me ask you both about, in the Binghamton shooter, we know used a weapon that fired repeatedly. Robert Levy, what's the rationale for permitting somebody to have 2 guns that fired 98 rounds in a little over a minute?
Automatic weapons, that is, weapons that continue firing with one pull of the trigger. They have been heavily regulated, and they continue to be heavily regulated since 1934. As a matter of fact, if they were manufactured any time after 1986, and we're talking about 23 years, there's an outright ban on such weapons. But with respect to semi-automatic weapons, that is, one fire each time the trigger is pulled, those weapons are used for self-defense. They're used for hunting, they're used for target shooting, they're even used for Olympic competition, and this is by tens of millions of Americans. We can't prohibit guns from being used for self-defense merely because there may be a misuse of the guns that results in violence.
Dan Webster, final comment.
Well, I think that you're getting at the wrong issue. We're really not talking about whether someone should be able to defend themselves with a gun. What we're talking about is what can we do as a country to better have more sensible gun policies to keep guns from dangerous people. We can do that and still allow law-abiding citizens access to guns.
You're saying if the laws are changed?
If the laws are improved, yes, and enforced.
All right, gentlemen, big subject, and we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much, Dan Webster, and thank you, Robert Levy. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, how women in North America have changed the lives of hundreds of women in Uganda. Spencer Michaels narrates our story of a group called Bead for Life.
For 5 years, women in Uganda have been excited about Bead for Life. Co-founded by American Torkin Wakefield, this nonprofit has brought hundreds of people out of extreme poverty. It's all been done with beads, rolling them, stringing them, selling them. Before Wakefield came along, many of the beaders earned less than $1 a day breaking rocks in a gravel pit and lived in malaria-infested slums.
Look at your baby. She looks really healthy.
Hello, Moses. Yeah, the proud papa. Yeah.
So how did Bead for Life help Moses Kawanzi, his blind wife, Ruth Machala, and others earn $280 a month and own their own homes? Social entrepreneur Wakefield says it was one step at a time.
I think for me personally that I never understood where we were going. I never had a clear vision, and even yet for Bead for Life, it's you take a step and you pay attention. And as you see what options you have in front of you, you make the next smart decision.
The first step happened near Kampala, in a place called the Acholi Quarter, the crowded home to some of the 1.4 million people displaced by the decades-long war in the north of the country.
How skinny these cattle are.
Wakefield, a psychologist from Colorado, was in Uganda with her husband, an AIDS doctor. There she met Millie Grace Akina, who was rolling beads out of paper. She had 400 necklaces, but no market. Wakefield started buying her beads and then trained more people to make them. Women like Achan Grace, who 3 years ago lived in the Acholi Quarter.
Achan Grace seems to float when she moves, despite the fact that she's usually toting her one-year-old twins. This graceful young woman is the mother of 5 children.
Bead for Life brought her story and her beads to North America to create a woman-to-woman network. Last year, more than 100,000 people attended almost 2,000 Bead for Life house parties. 1/4 of the money raised goes back to the beaders, half to develop projects in Uganda, and most of the rest to education and sales events. In order to make it all work, the group has to take in $250,000 a month, with almost all of that coming from house parties and online sales.
This one is 20, and each one of those is 5, so that's 15 and 20 is 35. 35? Do you have cash?
The next step was a giant one. 2 years ago, Bead for Life bought land, built houses, and sold them for around $2,200, payable in beads, not cash.
They're paying in beads, and they're rich in beads. You know, it just depends what the currency is, whether you're rich or not.
Achan Grace rolled over 1 million beads in 3 years and will fully own her own home and the land by this spring.
She's come from in danger of dying to self-sufficiency and ownership. This is, when you think about eradicating poverty, this is what the goal is. It's someone standing on their own feet.
There are now 106 houses and more than 600 people in what is called Friendship Village.
Finding an option for the landless of the world is an important piece of stabilizing. Because when you own a piece of land and you have a house, you protect it, you make it beautiful, you make it productive, you invest your own passion in it.
Sissy Nalule had been homeless after being robbed.
I went to see the foundation and I said, is this my real house? Will there such be a day and I sleep in my own house? It will be so wonderful. And I don't know what I'll do the first day when I'll sleep in my life, in my house. Maybe I'll sing the whole night. I don't know what I will do.
One fear about starting a new village has been tribal violence, which has a long history in Uganda, but that hasn't happened here.
People are making friends across tribal lines. We have quite a few Muslims, as well as many Catholics and Protestants and born-agains that share this space, and We thought that would be a problem, but it hasn't turned out to be a problem.
Margaret Awata learned that firsthand. Her husband was killed because he was on the wrong side when Yoweri Museveni became president. Now she's one of 11 people elected to run the village.
I have to lead the people in the village, let them, unite them to come together, inject knowledge into their brain.
Even after she started beading, she kept living under a tree with 5 kids to save money for a house.
I never had anything like what we are sitting on. I never had any clothes on myself. I never had a bed. I never had a mattress. So all that was rehabilitation and seeing my children off to school.
You're proud, huh?
I'm very, very proud of myself now. I'm now a lady, don't you see?
Bead for Life sees itself as a transitional program. After 27 months, the beaders have to start doing something else, like learning auto repair. Bead for Life sponsors them and others in vocational training classes, while also teaching life skills. The organization also runs monthly sessions on how to market and finance businesses.
Hey, look at your garden. Your basil's growing like crazy. Yes. This is fantastic. You know, you're going to find a good market. You're going to find a good market for this. When you come into the office on Friday, let's talk about marketing.
Okay.
And how to approach the restaurants in Kampala.
Okay.
And what you're going to need in order to package and keep it really fresh.
Those who've made beads now are doing everything from cutting bead paper, like Moses Kawanzi, to running a restaurant. And every step of the way, they get advice and counsel.
You know, what options does she have for expanding? And then, you know, what else? One of the things I've been thinking about recently is the difference between charity, programs that are really charitable, and programs that are really more about empowerment. And I like to think that Bead for Life is really about helping hardworking people become individuals who can sustain themselves into the future long after Bead for Life is a fond memory.
Fatuma Laker learned the lessons quickly. Before coming to Bead for Life, she was kidnapped by soldiers in the north, raped, and bore 2 children. She finally escaped and married, only to have her husband die. She was trying to live on 25 cents a day and thinking about poisoning herself and her kids when she heard about Bead for Life. When she first got paid, she was stunned.
I refused that money. I said, no, this is not my money. Then they were comforting me, no, it is your money. Actually, it was like something surprising. You first time to get something very big, what you were not expecting out of what you made.
But then she got down to business. She paid her back rent, then bought a popcorn machine. She leased it out and used the money for rent. Then she started selling groceries and used that money to feed her family.
I'm planning for more because now I have my house. Nobody is demanding me. They don't chase me away. Go, go, go. No, it's not there. I have my peace. I sleep as I want. I get up at my own time. I do my things as I want. Now I feel I'm happy. At least I'm up. Even my children, they have life.
Bead for Life is now ready for some next steps. It wants to market more products, build more homes, and find a way to provide affordable housing in people's own communities.
And to the housing problem here in the U.S., Jeffrey Brown looks at foreclosures and why it's so difficult to stem a rising tide.
A bad situation has suddenly become worse. As we heard earlier in the program, foreclosures spiked sharply upward in the first quarter of the year, this despite a number of efforts initiated by government and major lenders. We look at what's happening and why with John Vogel, professor of real estate at the Tuck School of Business at Dartmouth College, and we hope to be joined soon by Susan Wachter of the University of Pennsylvania. She's also a professor of real estate and co-director of its Institute for Urban Research. We're working on technical difficulties and hope to have her join us. John Vogel, let's start with why the increase. What's going on?
Good evening, Jeffrey. a couple of very simple things. We have unemployment, we have the economic problems. That's causing part of the problem. And another part of the problem is the end of the moratorium. So banks have started foreclosing again.
Let's explain the moratorium. Remind us what that meant, who participated, and why is it coming to an end?
Most of the major lenders, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and a number of the major banks all participated in the moratorium because the government asked them to hold off on foreclosure while they developed the Obama plan to prevent foreclosures. But it was time limited, and now the time has run out, and these banks have gone back to foreclosing.
And in terms of how the economy affects all this, there it sounds like a bit of a vicious cycle, right? Since it was the housing problem that got a lot of this going, and therefore now we have a lot of unemployment, and therefore that, leads to more foreclosures?
Exactly right. It is a vicious cycle, and I'd love to see a way to bring it to a halt. I have a few ideas about that, but we'll discuss that during the show. All right. Well, let's get to that. First, maybe it's related, or maybe you want to comment on President Obama's the plan he put forward recently. Now, that's a $75 billion plan, and just yesterday, the Treasury Department announced that it was giving $10 billion to several of the big mortgage lenders. Tell us where things stand with that program. Well, there's some brilliant parts to the Obama plan, and it's nice to see us finally putting some major resources into trying to stop foreclosure, not trying to do it all on the cheap. This is a deep problem, and we need some resources to get out of it. My problem with the Obama plan, which is we really don't seem to have learned our lesson from the last 2.5 years of the housing crisis. And the lesson is that if you make it voluntary to the lender, it doesn't work. If you go back to October of 2007, with great fanfare, we announced Hope Now. All of the major lenders stepped up, said, we're going to do this voluntarily. And of course, that hasn't worked. In July of 2008, announced again with great fanfare the passage of the bill with the Hope for Home Ownership. Again, we made it voluntary to the lenders, and I guess to date we've refinanced one loan with the $300 billion that they set aside in FHA mortgages for that program. There are great parts to the Obama plan, some of the subsidizing down to 31% of income. You know, we have learned. People get foreclosed on. People can't afford mortgages that are much above 31% of their income. So helping servicers, helping borrowers get to an affordable level is a great idea. Again, it's voluntary to the lender. And, you know, if you think about that for a minute, you know, if you ask the lender, you know, what's a fair deal, you get one answer. If you ask the borrower what's a fair deal, you get a different answer. And neither one seems to be the right answer. You need a third party to step in and say, here's a fair deal.
All right, I think we now have Susan Wachter with us. Am I right? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, apologies for
my pleasure to be here, no problem.
Okay, thanks for joining us. We have been talking, of course, about the rise in foreclosures and what is to be done. Now, as you look out at various programs, either the administration or private sector, what do you see that is positive and what isn't working? What do you see?
Well, right now we're going to have a short-run surge in foreclosures as we come off the moratorium, no doubt about it. But there is much that's positive in the Obama plans, including just started March 4th, the Fannie-Freddie plans, which are making eligible millions of homes that are facing foreclosure that now are eligible for refinance at historically low rates. That will help a lot.
I don't know if you heard what John Vogel was just saying.
I did.
What about this issue of making it mandatory for lenders? And
that's the other piece, and I absolutely agree with with John Vogel's comments. The problem is many of these plans have been voluntary, and they're dead in the water. The other piece of the Obama plan is if the banks are accepting TARP money, they must go ahead with the loan modification plans. And we'll have to wait to see how well that works, but it's certainly better than the voluntary plans with no incentives, and the Obama plan also has significant incentives.
Have we seen to date much happening with modification of loans from the private sector?
Yes, there are modifications, and let's also make sure that we understand that not all mortgages that are in default can be modified successfully. And that's the key, distinguishing between those where modifications are economically sensible and those that they're not. The problem to date has been there have been excessive foreclosures, even with mortgages that could be saved. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to identify those that can be saved. And now we have incentives in place to help make that happen.
Well, pick up on that, Professor Vogel. Has the thinking evolved about who should be targeted for help, how many people can be saved, or how many foreclosures are just going to have to allow to happen?
I think there's a problem, and it doesn't have to do with the brilliant thinking of the Obama administration and the very clever people that are there. We have to keep it simple. Right now, you have people struggling to pay their mortgages, and you present them with a very complicated plan. The banks are trying to do it on a one-off basis, make every modification on an individual, let's modify John's loan, let's modify Bill's loan kind of basis. We have to structure it. We have to make it simple. We have to allow people to understand and qualify. And most importantly, again, a famous Obama phrase, we have to give them hope. One of the things we've seen, there was a very interesting report by the National Bureau of Economic Research, which essentially says, there are two aspects of people struggling to hold on to their homes. One is you make it affordable, but the other is you have to bring the mortgage back down into line with what a house is worth. And when you have 14 million homes underwater, it makes it harder for people to make that struggle, to continue to pay their loans. We're not addressing that part of the problem.
All right, let me ask you finally, Susan Wachter, as we look forward here, do you expect the numbers to go up, at least in the short term?
Yes, unfortunately, I do expect them to go up in the short term. And then hopefully, as the economy improves, and a lot depends on that, we'll see some leveling off in 2010.
All right. Well, again, apologies for the technical troubles.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Susan Wachter and John Vogel.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, a story that has circled the globe via YouTube at breakneck speed. It features a Scottish competitor who appeared recently on the show Britain's Got Talent. Phil Ray Smith of Independent Television News updates what's happened to her.
How old are you, Susan?
I am 47. And that's just one side of me.
Nothing about her suggested she was one performance away from worldwide fame.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by.
But Susan Boyle's life changed when she opened her mouth.
You didn't expect that, did you? Did you? No.
As of this evening, the unemployed church singer from Blackburn's performance has been viewed online more than 20 million times.
That's immense, all right.
So you're quite a star.
Cool. Well, all I can say is thank you.
Despite her modesty, she's having to adjust to being a celebrity.
Lots of fan mail, and I've had a lot of support from the neighbourhood in general. They're very supportive, especially my family. I'm blessed with a good family.
And what do they all think about it then?
I think it's great. I think it's magic.
And despite the judge's initial reservations about her appearance, there'll be no makeover.
I honestly think it spoils people if you give them a big old makeover, and it's best that they do it if and when they win, or if something else happens to them after the show. But I think we'll keep her as she is for now, so she doesn't have the added pressure of worrying about what she looks like.
And she's achieved all this before even making it into the second round.
3 S's.
Again, the major developments of the day. President Obama pledged to help Mexico fight the flow of drugs and guns across the border during a speech in Mexico City. And back in Washington, the Obama administration said CIA officials who used harsh interrogation techniques on terror suspects won't be prosecuted. And a reminder, you can find us online at our one-stop address, newshour.pbs.org. Tonight, you can watch reports on the foreclosure crisis from our colleagues at KETC St. Louis. Explore a timeline of the gun control debate in the 10 years since the shootings at Columbine High School in Colorado. And read more about the response in Afghanistan to a new law restricting rights for women. Remember, the NewsHour is available whenever you want it at newshour.pbs.org. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening with Ruth Marcus and Michael Gerson, among others. I'm Judy Woodruff. Thank you and good night.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by Chevron, Intel, supporting math and science education for tomorrow's innovators, and by Grant Thornton.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems at home and around the world.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations.
With standard 17-inch aluminum wheels, power windows and door locks, a 5-star government crash test rating, standard electronic stability program, and a fuel-efficient 3.7-liter V6 engine. In fact, we found that the only other vehicle that can measure up to its style, comfort, and capability is another Jeep Grand Cherokee. This is the final month to get employee pricing and $2,000 cash allowance on Jeep Grand Cherokee.
She's my girlfriend, Martin. You know, you're never going to win Boyfriend of the Year.
In Los Angeles,
Grandma is having fun.
nothing succeeds like excess.
I need something.
What else is there? You already have everything.
Something more than this.
From Bret Easton Ellis, the author of American Psycho and Less Than Zero.
Did you ever love me?
Billy Bob Thornton, Kim Basinger, Winona Ryder, and Mickey Rourke.
Can't make it in this town unless you're willing to do some awful things.
The Informers, rated R, in theaters April 24th.
Visit buyweston.com or call 503-665-2166 now and drive home a new 2009 Pontiac G3. This week at Weston Pontiac, it's just $89.88 or $149 a month. You heard right. Under $9,000 for a new sporty Pontiac G3. 0% financing available. And only GM offers the total confidence package. So why buy used when you can drive home a new Pontiac for under $10,000?
Come see us today at Oregon's #1 volume Pontiac Buick GMC dealer. Or call me. Just ask for Dan.
Come to Weston Pontiac today or call 503-665-2166 now.
The world's biggest carpet mill asked us to sell 3 truckloads of their finest carpet while it lasts. Get 3 rooms of carpet installed with pads starting at $599 or the whole house for just $12.99. It's going to go fast, so hurry into Marriott's.
Dial 503 Carpets.
Have you ever wondered how car dealerships get their trade-in prices? When we appraise your car at Wilsonville Toyota, we'll show you Kelley Blue Book prices and auction reports, and it'll actually make sense. Wilsonville Toyota, the dealership that's changing it all. Where do you want to buy your next car?